Hello. I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your mind travel somewhere ancient, somewhere quietly magnificent, somewhere most people have never been and never will go. Tonight, you're going somewhere that time tried to erase, somewhere that sand and centuries and silence nearly swallowed whole. You are going to the monasteries of Xi Xia, to the sacred mountain temples of the Tangut people, to a civilization so complete, so breathtaking, so deeply devoted to the spiritual life that even its destruction could not fully silence it. Even now, under a night sky as old as the stars themselves, those monastery walls still whisper. And tonight, lying exactly where you are, breathing exactly as you are breathing, you're going to hear them. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where distant histories return, not urgently, but patiently, where civilizations rise and fall in the quiet theater of your imagination, and where you find yourself not as a passive observer, but as someone standing inside the story. Someone breathing the same cold mountain air that monks breathed 1,000 years ago. Someone feeling the same candlelight flicker against stone walls that no longer stand. Later in life, the mind does not race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it connects dots that once seemed unrelated. And it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that do not surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you are alone with yourself, resting, remembering, and gently making sense of the world's long, lived-in history. So take a slow breath. Let your body soften into the bed and allow this night to carry you somewhere sacred and still. Before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle journey speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There is something deeply comforting about knowing we are all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone. You are traveling in the company of history, of devotion, of a people who built their prayers into mountains and never stopped believing. Let's begin. You are lying still now, and somewhere far away across time itself, a monastery is waiting for you. Not a ruin, not a photograph in a history book, a living, breathing place exactly as it existed in the 11th century, when the Tangut people were at the height of their extraordinary civilization. The candles inside burn with a calm, untroubled flame. The incense rises in slow spirals toward a painted ceiling of extraordinary beauty. The monks have finished their evening chants, and the mountain outside the monastery walls is perfectly, completely silent. This is Xi Xia. This is where you are going tonight. But first, let your body settle completely. Let the mattress hold you the way the earth holds everything placed upon it, steadily, without effort, without condition. Feel the weight of your arms, your legs, your shoulders releasing downward, one by one, like stones lowering gently into still water. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to carry into this hour. The world outside this room is resting, and so are you. Every breath you take is slower than the one before. Every breath draws you a little deeper into the stillness that those ancient monks knew so well. They spent entire lifetimes cultivating exactly this quality of quiet, decades of sitting practice, of returning again and again to the simple fact of breath, of learning how to let the mind rest without forcing it, without fighting it. They called it peace. They built entire structures of stone and timber and devotion around it. And tonight, that same peace is available to you, here, in this room, in this body, in this breath you are taking right now. The Tangut people are not a name most people carry with them through their daily lives. And that is part of what makes encountering them here, in the quiet of the night, feel like something genuinely discovered, rather than merely recalled. The Tanguts were a people of Tibeto-Burman origin who rose from the northwestern frontier of what is now China, from the windswept borderlands of the Ordos Plateau and the shifting, restless edges of the Gobi Desert. They were fierce and proud and intellectually restless and deeply, profoundly spiritual. They understood that a civilization is not measured only by its armies or its trade routes or its territorial extent. A civilization is ultimately defined by what it builds when it is trying to reach something beyond itself. And what the Tanguts built when they were reaching beyond themselves was breathtaking. In 1038, their leader Yuan Hao declared the founding of a new empire. He called it Da Xia, the Great Xia. The Chinese neighbors would call it Xi Xia, the Western Xia. And from that declaration forward, for nearly 200 years, the Tanguts built something extraordinary on the edge of the known world. They created their own writing system, a script of breathtaking complexity and visual beauty, with nearly 6,000 individual characters, each one a small architectural achievement, a building made of lines and curves and careful proportion. They translated enormous volumes of Buddhist scripture into this script, with a patience and dedication that simply staggers the imagination. They built libraries and established printing houses that produced texts in quantities rarely seen anywhere in the medieval world. They created legal codes and administrative systems and calendar reforms. They established trade relationships with Tibet and Central Asia and the Chinese Empire to the east. And above all else, above nearly everything else, they built temples, they built monasteries. They carved their faith into the living rock of sacred mountains and raised pagodas that could be seen from miles across the flat desert. Their devotion was not quiet or private or apologetic. It was architectural. It was carved in stone, painted in mineral pigments, gilded with real gold, and offered continuously to the sky. Tonight, you're going to walk inside that devotion. You are going to move through those monastery halls as if you have always belonged there, as if some quiet part of you has been waiting a very long time to come back to exactly this place. Let your eyes close a little more. Let your breathing slow to its own natural pace, unhurried, easy, like a stream finding its own level. The room around you is softening, not because the light has changed, but because your attention is turning inward and then outward towards something older. The ordinary sounds of the present are fading, move gently to the background, like music lowered beneath something more compelling. And in their place, something ancient is rising. A landscape, an enormous sky, pale blue, deepening to violet at the edges, the particular color of dusk at altitude where the air is clean and thin. A range of mountains to the west, their peaks still holding the last amber light of a day that has almost completely ended. And ahead of you, built into the base of a mountain so ancient it has forgotten its own formation, a monastery appears. Its walls are rammed earth, thick and smooth, and the color of the desert itself. Its roofline curves upward at the corners in the way that Tangut architects learned from both Tibetan and Chinese traditions, and then made entirely their own. Something that belongs to neither fully and to both completely. You are approaching it now along a path worn smooth by 1,000 years of footsteps. Pilgrims and scholars and merchants and monks and ordinary people with ordinary heavy hearts have all walked this path before you. You can feel the packed earth beneath your feet, cool and solid and permanent in a way that the world above it is not. The smell of juniper and dry stone is in the air, and underneath it, something sweeter, the trace of incense that has been burning in this valley for so long. It has become part of the atmosphere itself, and somewhere ahead, behind those walls of rammed earth and carved timber, a bell is ringing, low and patient and completely unhurried. A sound that does not demand anything of you. It simply announces itself and then retreats, letting the silence return. And the silence is itself a form of welcome. The Tangut Monasteries were not small or modest or apologetic about their presence in the landscape. They were declarations of sacred intent, written in stone and timber and earth. The Tangut rulers understood that architecture is itself a form of theology, that the physical scale of a sacred space makes an argument about the importance of what happens inside it. The beauty in a place of worship is not decoration, but invitation. When Emperor Yuanhao ordered the construction of the great monastery complexes near his capital of Xingqing, which is now the city of Yinchuan in what is today the Ningxia Hui Autonomous Region, he was not simply providing facilities for monks. He was participating in a conversation between earth and heaven. He was building the Tangut people's answer to the question of what matters most. The monasteries were meant to be visible across the flat desert plain for miles in every direction. They were meant to stop travelers in their tracks and make them feel, without words, that something here was engaged with a significance larger than any individual life. You are inside the gate now. The courtyard within is wide and paved with flat stones set carefully into the earth by hands that have been still for a very long time. Trees grow along the walls, their winter branches bare against the sky, their shapes like calligraphy brushed against the darkening blue above. The Helen Mountains rise beyond the monastery walls, and in the darkness their presence is palpable. They are enormous and permanent and indifferent to human concern in a way that is not cold but simply honest. Mountains this old have seen everything human beings are capable of, and they have not been diminished by any of it. They simply remain quiet and enormous, and their remaining is a kind of teaching if you are still enough to receive it. Among the most recognizable structures that the Tangut people left behind are their pagodas. Not the tall, many-tiered pagodas of Chinese tradition, though the Tanguts knew those well, but something distinctly their own. The Tangut pagoda was broader at the base, more solid-looking, more anchored to the earth, as if it were trying to become part of the mountain rather than reach away from it. The twin pagodas at Baisiku, which still stand near Yinchuan today in weathered and reduced but still astonishing form, give some sense of what these structures meant in the full presence of their original height. They were built facing each other across a narrow valley. Two towers in silent conversation, one representing the masculine principle and one the feminine, together forming a complete cosmological argument about the nature of reality. Travelers approaching through the valley would have seen them rising against the mountain sky and understood without being told that they were entering a zone where ordinary rules did not fully apply, where the categories of the everyday world were subordinate to something larger. The pagodas were not simply markers of the monastery's location. They were the monastery's opening statement, its first sentence in the language of sacred space. Inside the monastery compounds, smaller structures clustered around the main hall like attendants around a central figure. Storage buildings for the monastery's library collections, kitchens where simple vegetarian meals were prepared morning and evening, workshops where the monks produced the items needed for ritual, incense pressed into cones, butter lamps filled from carefully stored reserves, the thread and cloth used in ceremonial display. Herbalist rooms where monks trained in traditional medicine compounded remedies for the community and for lay people who came seeking treatment. Small private cells where individual monks slept and prayed and read by lamplight in the hours before dawn and after dusk. The monastery was not a single building, but an entire small world, a community organized around shared purpose with an efficiency that centuries of trial and refinement had made nearly perfect, and connecting all of it, running through the whole complex like the thread of breath through a living body, the sound of chanting. The Tangut chants were not identical to Tibetan or Chinese Buddhist chant. They had their own particular intervals, their own rhythmic structures, their own tradition of performance that the Tangut monks developed over generations. When the full community gathered for the major prayer periods, the sound they produced together was something genuinely extraordinary. The individual voices, each one trained through years of practice, blended into a collective resonance that filled the monastery's central hall and spilled out through the open doors into the courtyard and from there into the mountain air, carrying outward in the desert clarity for a distance that seemed impossible from voices alone. The Helen Mountains were sacred to the Tangut people in a way that went beyond formal religious designation. They were woven into the fabric of Tangut identity and imagination and daily life itself. The mountains formed the western edge of the Tangut heartland, and their valleys sheltered monastery after monastery, refuge after refuge, carved cave temple after carved cave temple. When the Tangut monks needed solitude for deep practice, they climbed into those mountain valleys. When emperors needed to pray away from the noise of the capital, they came to those slopes. The rock faces of the Helen Range bear thousands of petroglyphs left by people who lived here long before the Tanguts arrived, images of animals and hunters and celestial forms that the Tangut monks would have encountered when they came to establish their own sacred sites. They did not erase those older images. They built alongside them, acknowledging without ceremony that this ground had been considered holy by human beings for a very long time, and that no single civilization owns the sacred. The cave temples carved into the Helen mountain rock face represent some of the most intimate expressions of Tangut faith. Unlike the grand monastery complexes of the capital, these mountain caves were small, personal, cut directly into the living stone by monks who worked with hammer and chisel through months and years, carving the space around their own devotion. The walls inside those caves were painted with the same mineral pigments used in the great monastery halls, but the scale was completely different. In a cave temple, the painted bodhisattva on the wall is very close to you. Their expression is visible in detail. Their hands are right there. The relationship between the worshipper and the image was intimate in a way that the grand halls could not quite replicate. In those caves, a monk could be alone with what they believed, alone with what they were reaching for. The mountain rock surrounding them on every side, cold and solid and ancient, while inside that small carved space, the painted faces glowed by candlelight. You find yourself crossing the courtyard now, your footsteps quiet on the flat stones. Ahead of you, the main hall stands with its doors open, warm light spilling out across the threshold onto the courtyard paving. You can hear very softly the low drone of a ritual horn being played somewhere inside, a single sustained note, long and resonant, more vibration than sound, the kind of note felt in the sternum before the ears consciously register it. Step inside. The hall is taller than it appears from outside, its ceiling painted in deep reds and blues and warm gold. Geometric patterns interlace with images of the Buddha in his many forms and the bodhisattvas, those compassionate, enlightened beings who chose to remain engaged with the suffering world. This is the spiritual tradition the Tanguts embraced completely. Mahayana Buddhism, the great vehicle, the path of active compassion and radical interconnection. They practiced it with the full commitment of a civilization that had decided this was the most important project. The walls are covered in murals, and you stop before them the way you stop before something that has been waiting for your specific attention. The faces in these paintings are not generic. They are particular. They have expressions and gestures and qualities of attention in their painted eyes that tell you something about the people who created them and the people who came here over centuries to stand exactly where you are standing and look at them. These bodhisattvas are present in the hall with you. They are looking back. The Tangut artists understood that sacred art's purpose was not to decorate a space, but to populate it with presences that worshippers could actually feel. Consider for a moment the daily rhythm of life in this monastery. You can feel it around you now. not the activity itself, which has long since ended for the evening, but its residue, the shape that daily devotion leaves in a space after years of repetition. The monks rose before dawn in the cold darkness of these same rooms. They washed their faces with cold water and gathered in this same hall while the sky outside was still dark and the stars were still bright over the Helen Mountains. They chanted the morning prayers in voices that over years of practice had become tuned instruments, capable of producing harmonics that seemed to vibrate the painted walls themselves. Then scholarship. The monastery library was the intellectual heart of the complex, and the monks who served as translators and scholars worked there through the morning hours, surrounded by stacks of manuscript and the smell of paper and the sound of brushes moving across prepared surfaces. They worked in silence or in quiet consultation with one another, men who had dedicated their intelligence as completely as their devotion to the project of making wisdom available in the Tangut language. Then more prayer in the afternoon. Then simple meals eaten in community. Then the evening chants that have just finished as you arrived. Then sleep in simple cells with simple beds, their rest as disciplined and intentional as every other part of their day. This was a life of extraordinary intention. Every part of it was chosen. Every part of it was oriented toward the same thing. And the thing it was oriented toward was present in this hall tonight, in the way that long-held intentions always leave their presence behind them. The monastery's library deserves its own moment of your attention, because for the Tanguts, the library was not secondary to the prayer hall. In many ways, it was equal to it. The great library at Karakoto, the Black City at the edge of the desert, which was one of the westernmost Tangut settlements, was excavated in 1909 by the Russian explorer Pyotr Kozlov, who found beneath the ruins of a collapsed mosque wall an extraordinary cache of manuscripts and printed texts, more than 8,000 items, Buddhist sutras and commentaries, legal documents, calendars, medical texts, poetry, administrative records, all of it in the Tangut script, preserved by the dry desert air through nearly 700 years of burial. That discovery gave the modern world its first real glimpse of the scale of Tangut literary achievement, and it was only a fragment of what once existed. The libraries of the major monastery complexes near the capital would have dwarfed Karakoto's collection. They would have contained tens of thousands of volumes, the accumulated translation work of generations of scholar monks who understood that preserving wisdom was itself an act of compassion. The monk scholars who worked in those libraries worked in a silence that was different from the silence of the prayer hall. The silence of the library was industrious. It was the silence of complete concentration, of minds working at the edge of their capacity, holding two languages simultaneously, weighing one word against another, making decisions that would affect how an entire civilization understood the nature of mind and suffering and liberation. They sat at low desks with their manuscripts spread before them and their brushes moving carefully, and the sounds of the monastery around them, the distant chanting, the bell marking the hours, the wind against the outer walls, became a kind of music they worked within. The illuminated manuscripts they produced were not merely functional. They were works of art, their pages bordered with intricate patterns, their chapter openings decorated with miniature paintings of bodhisattvas no larger than a thumb. Even the transcription of sacred text was understood as a devotional act. The quality of attention you brought to copying a sutra was itself a form of prayer. Let your eyes travel across the murals without any urgency at all. There is truly no hurry here. The Tangut script runs along the base of the murals in long, careful lines. It appears above doorways and is carved into wooden beams darkened with age and incense smoke. You cannot read it, and in this particular state of stillness, that inability feels like freedom rather than limitation. Freedom to experience language as pure form, as visual music, as evidence of an intelligence that cared about the shape of meaning. Each character was designed by people who thought carefully about the relationship between the written mark and the sacred concept it was meant to carry. They were not recording information. They were building pathways for understanding to travel along, from mind to mind across generations. Let your body settle even more completely into the bed. Notice your hands resting open on the covers, palms soft, fingers uncurled. Notice your feet, which have carried you through your entire life, resting now, finally, completely still. Notice your breath moving in and out, without any effort from you at all. Your body knows how to breathe. It has always known. It learned this before you had language for it. Your only task in this moment is to let it continue, to let your body do what it knows how to do while your mind rests in this ancient, painted, candlelit hall, surrounded by 1,000 years of sincere human longing for something greater. Outside the monastery walls, the desert wind moves, low and patient. The mountains absorb it without alarm. The stars above the Helen Range are the same stars that the Tangut monks looked up at on winter nights in the 11th and 12th centuries, tracking the same patterns, reading the same sky. You are looking at them now through your closed eyes and through 1,000 years of distance, and somehow that distance feels less significant than the connection, less real than the thread of shared humanity that runs through all of it. They wanted to understand. They wanted to be good. They wanted to reach something larger than individual life, and they built everything they could think of to help them get there. These are not foreign desires. You know these desires. You have lived with them your whole life. That is why this place feels, even across all this time and distance, like somewhere you recognize. The candles are burning low now. The shadows in the corners of the hall are deep and quiet. The painted bodhisattvas look out from the walls with their expressions of complete equanimity, neither happy nor sad, but something larger than either, something that contains both and goes beyond them entirely. This is the peace that those monasteries were built to cultivate and transmit. The understanding, felt rather than intellectually grasped, that all things arise and pass away, that this is not a tragedy to be fought, but a truth to be rested in. And on the other side of fully accepting that truth, something opens, something relaxes, something that has been held very tightly for a very long time finally lets go. You are feeling some of that release right now. Not because you have studied Buddhist philosophy or earned any particular understanding, but because you are here in this quiet, and the quiet has been working on you, and sometimes that is exactly enough. Your breathing is very slow now, very deep. The weight of your body is entirely surrendered to the bed, to the mattress, to the earth beneath this building and every building, to the ground that holds all of us without discrimination. You are being held right now. You have always been held. The monastery understands this. Its foundations go deep into the mountain soil. Its walls were built by people who knew that what holds us is always larger than what we can name. The Tangut monks, who slept in their simple cells on the other side of these painted walls, slept the same way you're sleeping now, held by the same earth, covered by the same sky, breathing air that has been breathing since before any of us had names for it. The distance between their lives and yours, which seemed so enormous when you were awake and busy, seems very small right now, very manageable. In the stillness, the centuries compress. What remains across all that distance is the essential thing. The breath, the body resting, the mind growing quiet, the reaching, however imperfect, towards something good. Feel the weight of your body completely now, not with any effort of analysis, simply by allowing your awareness to rest in the sensation of weight. Your heels are heavy, your calves are heavy, the backs of your thighs have released completely into the surface beneath you. Your lower back, which carries so much during the ordinary hours of the day, has let go. Your upper back, your shoulders, your arms are lying like things that have been set down rather than things that are being held. Your hands are open. There is nothing in them that needs holding. Your neck is soft. The back of your head rests against the pillow with the full, honest weight of everything you have thought and remembered and understood and wondered about over the course of your life. And the pillow receives that weight without complaint, without judgment, without any demand for you to be lighter than you are. You are exactly the right weight. You are exactly the right size and shape for this moment. This bed, this room, this particular night were made for someone of exactly your dimensions, carrying exactly your history, needing exactly this amount of rest. The monastery hall around you is fully dark now. The last candle has finished and the darkness is complete, which means it is also full of the accumulated peace of all the prayers that have been offered here, all the chanting, all the careful scholarly attention, all the sincere reaching towards something larger. That fullness surrounds you like warmth. It does not require you to do anything to receive it. It is simply present the way the mountains are present, the way the ancient stars are present, offering what they offer without condition and without end. Somewhere outside these walls, in the desert beyond the valley, the wind is moving across the open plain, the same wind that moved across it 1,000 years ago, carrying dust from the same mountain sources, traveling the same routes across the same geography that the Tangut merchants and pilgrims and soldiers and monks once crossed on foot and on horseback. That wind does not know the difference between centuries. It simply moves. It has always simply moved. And you, lying here in this room on this night, are part of the same continuous world that the Tangut people lived in. Different in so many surface ways. The same in every way that matters. Human beings seeking rest. Human beings seeking meaning. human beings grateful, however quietly, for a night that has been gentle enough to hold them. This is where we rest for now. The monastery is still here. The candles are burning to their ends. The Helen Mountains wait in the darkness beyond the walls, patient as they have always been. In the second part of our journey together, you will go deeper still into the sacred world of the Tangut people, into the great library at Karakoto, where 10,000 manuscripts waited in the dark for someone to find them, into the life of the scholar monks who dedicated everything they had to the work of transmission, into the final days of Xi Xia and what survived. That journey is waiting for you, unhurried, exactly where you will leave it. But right now, in this breath, in this moment, in this stillness that you have arrived at simply by being willing to stop and be still and let the night do what the night has always done, there is only this quiet, this warmth, this ancient and patient peace that has traveled across 1,000 years of human history, through conquest and silence and rediscovery, to meet you exactly here tonight. You are enough to receive it. You have always been enough. You have always deserved exactly this kind of rest. Rest now, and let the first half of this long, peaceful night be entirely, completely yours. You have rested. The first half of this night has moved through you, like water through stone, slowly, gently, leaving something changed in the places it touched. Your body is still heavy. Your breathing is still slow. The monastery is still here, exactly where you left it, exactly as you left it. The painted walls and the shadowed ceiling and the mountains beyond the gate standing patient in the dark. Nothing here requires your urgency. Nothing here measures the quality of your presence. You have only to remain, and the journey continues on its own. We left you in the main hall as the last candle finished. We left you in the dark that is also fullness. And now, in the second half of this night, you are going to go further, not away from the monastery, but deeper into it, into the parts of Tangut's sacred life that the grand hall does not fully reveal, into the relationships and the rituals and the specific textures of devotion that made this civilization not simply impressive, but genuinely, profoundly human. So breathe. Let your chest rise without effort. Let it fall without hurry. The air in this room is the same air it has always been, and your body knows exactly what to do with it. You've been breathing since before you had language for anything, and that knowledge lives in you completely, independent of thought, independent of effort, independent of everything except the simple fact of your being alive in this moment. Rest in that fact. Rest in the breath. And let the story continue. The Tangut Empire, at its height, was not a place that most outsiders fully understood. The Chinese dynasties to the east regarded Xi Xia with a complicated mixture of respect and wariness. The Tibetans to the south shared spiritual kinship through the Buddhism they both practiced, but maintained their own distinct identity. The nomadic peoples of the steppe to the north moved through relationships of alliance and tension with the Tanguts that shifted constantly with the political weather. And threading through all of these complicated relationships, serving as a kind of constant, as a language that crossed borders in ways that armies and merchants could not, was the network of monasteries. The monasteries of Xi Xia were not isolated from the world. This is something important to understand as you lie here in the dark, letting the image of these places settle more completely into your imagination. They were not retreats from engagement, but centers of it. They were places where Tibetan monks and Chinese monks and Central Asian scholars all came to study, to exchange texts, to discuss the finer points of doctrine and practice with Tangut counterparts who were, by the height of the empire's intellectual life, among the most sophisticated Buddhist scholars in the known world. The Tangut translation project had required the Tangut scholars to develop an extraordinary fluency in multiple intellectual traditions simultaneously. To translate a Sanskrit text into Tangut, they might work from a Tibetan intermediate translation, consulting Chinese versions where the Tibetan was ambiguous, cross-referencing everything against the original, and then making their own careful decisions about how to render concepts that had no precise equivalent in any of the languages involved. This was not merely linguistic work. It was philosophical work of the highest order. It required thinkers who could hold multiple, complete worldviews in mind at once and navigate between them with both precision and humility. Those thinkers existed. They lived in these monasteries. They worked in these libraries. They ate simple meals in these courtyards and slept in these cells and rose before dawn to chant in these halls. And in the hours between those ordinary and extraordinary acts of communal life, they did intellectual work that the world would not fully appreciate for nearly 1,000 years. Not until the manuscripts that survived the destruction of Xi Xia were finally studied by scholars who had learned to read the Tangut script. You are thinking about one of those scholars now, not a famous one, not an emperor or an abbot or a great translator whose name was recorded in colophons, just a monk, someone of middling years, perhaps in his 40s, when you are imagining him. Someone who came to this monastery as a boy and never left. Someone who was given a room and a teacher and a purpose and spent his decades fulfilling that purpose with the steady, unspectacular devotion that keeps a civilization alive from the inside. He rose this morning as he rose every morning in the cold before dawn. He washed his face and went to the hall and chanted with his brothers. He ate his porridge in the refectory in silence while a younger monk read aloud from a text they were all studying together. Then he went to the library and sat at his desk and picked up exactly where he had left off the previous afternoon. He is working on a passage from the Vimalakirti Sutra. This particular sutra is beloved across multiple Buddhist traditions because of its central figure, the layman Vimalakirti, who is said to be more deeply enlightened than most of the Buddha's inner circle, and who demonstrates this through a series of extraordinary exchanges that expose the limitations of conventional understanding with joyful precision. The Tangut translation of this text has been a generation in the making. Previous translators have worked through most of it, but this particular passage has been set aside as unusually difficult. Its final movement involves Vimalakirti's famous silence, his answer to a question about the nature of non-duality, not with words, but with complete and absolute quiet. The Chinese tradition calls this the thunder of silence, and our monk has been sitting with the problem of how to render this in Tangut for 3 weeks now, not because the words are hard, but because any words at all are, in some sense, wrong. He is trying to point in language at the place where language ends. You understand something about this, not from Buddhist scholarship, but from living. You have sat with things that could not be said. You have tried to find words for experiences that dissolved the moment you named them. You have known the thunder of silence in your own life, in moments that did not announce themselves as sacred but were. That monk at his desk, wrestling with the untranslatable, is not as far from you as the centuries suggest. Feel your hands resting on the covers. They are completely still and warm. They have worked hard over the course of your life, these hands. They have carried and built and held and written and touched the faces of people you loved. Right now, they are doing the most dignified thing hands can do, which is nothing at all. Simply resting. You have earned this rest through years of effort, and the rest that follows real effort is its own form of richness. It is not emptiness. It is a fullness that only becomes available when you finally stop. The monastery has a garden. You did not see it when you entered through the main gate, but it is here, on the eastern side of the compound, sheltered from the desert wind by a high wall of rammed earth. The garden in a Tangut monastery was not decorative in the way that a garden designed purely for pleasure might be. It was purposeful. It grew the herbs that the monastery's healers used in the treatment of illness, each one planted in its particular location for its particular soil and light requirements, tended with the same attentiveness that the monks brought to their meditation practice. It grew vegetables that supplemented the monks' simple diet. It had a small pond, half frozen now in the cold season, its surface a dull pewter color in the starlight, and beside the pond a single old tree whose species you cannot quite name in this darkness, its bark deeply furrowed, its bare winter branches reaching upward in every direction with an abandon that looks less like growth and more like a form of rejoicing. The monk who tends this garden is the oldest member of the community. He has been at this monastery for over 60 years. He came here as a young child, sent by his family from a farming village, a small boy with large ears and a serious expression who had never been more than a day's walk from the place of his birth. He learned everything he knows about the world within these walls and in the texts he has spent his life studying. He is gentle with the garden, the way he is gentle with everything, which is to say, completely. He knows each plant's particular needs. He knows which ones struggle in the alkaline soil of this valley and which ones thrive in it without any help at all. He knows that the old tree beside the pond survived a terrible winter 30 years ago when half the garden was lost to frost, and he has a reverence for it that goes beyond practical appreciation. It outlasted the worst. It is still here. Its branches still reach upward with that expression of impossible, unexplained joy. You are standing beside the pond now. You can feel the cold of the night air against your face, though the rest of you is warm. The garden is very quiet. The monastery sounds are muffled by the high eastern wall. Above you, the stars are so numerous that the sky between them seems less like darkness and more like a secondary light, a dim pervasive luminescence that makes the whole night gently visible. You look at the old tree for a long time. You don't try to understand it. You just look. This is a practice the old gardener has been refining for 60 years, and you are borrowing it for a moment. Simply looking. Simply being in the presence of something that has continued through everything that tried to stop it. The Tanguts practiced a form of Buddhism that integrated influences from multiple streams of the tradition. Tibetan tantric practices brought elaborate visualization techniques and a rich tradition of sacred art that the Tanguts absorbed and transformed into something entirely their own. Chan Buddhism, which the Chinese had developed from Indian roots through their own cultural genius, contributed a more direct and austere sensibility, a willingness to use paradox as a tool of awakening. The Tanguts did not choose between these traditions. They held both. They recognized that different practitioners needed different approaches, that the path was not singular but branching, and that the monastery's task was to make as many of those branches available as possible to as many different kinds of minds. This eclecticism was a form of wisdom. It required the Tangut teachers to be comfortable with uncertainty, to resist resolving complexity into simple formulas, to maintain intellectual hospitality toward apparently contradictory viewpoints. The great teachers of Xi Xia were not people who had found the one corrected answer. They were people who had learned to live with many possible answers simultaneously, choosing among them with discernment according to the needs of the student before them. You feel the temperature of the air shift slightly. Something in the night has moved. Some threshold crossed between the deepest cold of late evening and the slightly different quality of cold that comes in the hours before dawn. The stars have wheeled a little, so slowly you would not have noticed if you had not been watching for a long time. The old tree beside the pond makes no sound. The pond's surface is absolutely still. You are completely, perfectly in this moment, and the moment is complete. Let us talk about what was lost. Not because grief is the right ending to this journey, but because honesty requires it, and because the Tangut story is one that insists on being held whole, including its ending. In 1227, Genghis Khan launched the final campaign against Xi Xia, a campaign that had been interrupted by his death, but that his successors carried to its conclusion. The Mongol forces were thorough. The Tangut capital of Xingqing was taken and burned. The imperial tombs outside the city, those extraordinary rammed earth pyramids, were damaged and looted. The monasteries, which were among the most visible and valuable structures in the Tangut heartland, did not escape. Some were burned. Some were stripped of their portable contents, their statues and manuscripts and ritual objects carried away. Some simply fell into abandonment as the communities that had sustained them were destroyed or scattered. The Tangut language, that beautiful script of 6,000 characters, lost its speakers with a terrible swiftness. Within 2 generations of the conquest, the number of people who could read Tangut had fallen to almost nothing. Within 3 generations, it was essentially none. The texts that survived did so in libraries and the private collections where they waited unread for the world to remember that it had lost something. The memory of how to read them had to be reconstructed by modern scholars working backward from internal patterns and comparisons with other languages. It was painstaking detective work of the highest order, and it took generations. And it is still, in some respects, ongoing. Even now, there are Tangut texts that have not been fully translated, passages whose precise meaning remains under discussion among the handful of specialists in the world who have devoted their lives to recovering this lost language. But the texts survived. Not all of them, not most of them, but some. The manuscripts of Karakoto survived because a Tangut monk or soldier or administrator, in the final days before the city fell, sealed them inside the wall with a care and intentionality that speaks of someone who understood exactly what they were preserving and why. They put their civilization's written wisdom into the earth and trusted the dry desert air to hold it. And the desert did hold it for 680 years until Pyotr Kozlov's expedition broke through the old wall and found them waiting there in the dark. Think about that for a moment. Think about the act of faith involved in sealing something into a wall during a catastrophe and believing that someday, somehow, someone would find it and know what to do with it. That unknown monk or administrator did not know about the field of Tangutology. They did not know about the British Museum or the Institute of Oriental Manuscripts in St. Petersburg, where many of those manuscripts now rest, studied by scholars with digital imaging tools and computational linguistics and the entire accumulated knowledge of 150 years of modern sinology behind them. They just sealed the manuscripts in and hoped, and the hope was not disappointed. The manuscripts came through. Something survives. This is a truth that the Tangut story insists on, even in its most painful chapters. Something always survives. Not enough. Never enough. The survival is always partial, always shadowed by the immensity of what was lost. But something, a scholar's careful hand, preserving one text instead of 100, a wall dry enough to hold paper through centuries, a language reconstructed character by character from patterns and comparisons, and the patient, devoted attention of people who believed the work was worth doing. You're breathing very slowly now. Your body has found its own deepest rhythm, the one that lives beneath intention, beneath effort, beneath the ordinary workings of consciousness. This is the breath of genuine rest. You have arrived here not by trying, but by allowing. The monastery around you is completely still. The garden is still. The pond is still. Even the old tree beside the pond, which spent the whole night reaching upward with its winter arms, is still. A novice monk in a Tangut monastery began his training very young, often between the ages of 6 and 10. He came from a farming family or a trading family, sent by parents who recognized in him a quality of seriousness that seemed to belong to the contemplative life, or who were fulfilling a traditional obligation, or who trusted the monastery to care for the children they could not fully feed. Whatever brought him there, his education began immediately, and it was comprehensive. He learned to read and write the Tangut script. He memorized large portions of the liturgy by heart, chanting the syllables before he understood their meaning, letting the sounds live in his body until the understanding eventually caught up, finding that the sounds had prepared a place for the meaning to rest when it arrived. He studied mathematics and astronomy, which the monasteries needed for calculating the ritual calendar. He studied medicine, drawing on both Chinese and Tibetan traditions. He studied debate, the formal logical practice in which two scholars took opposing positions and argued them through with rigor and speed. He studied the history of the Buddhist teachings, tracing the lineages of transmission that connected his texts to the historical Buddha himself, understanding that he was part of a chain stretching back 25 centuries. He was also taught to sit still, to breathe, to return his wandering attention again and again without criticism to the present moment. This was perhaps the most difficult and the most fundamental of all his studies. Everything else rested on it. All the scholarship, all the debate and translation, all of it was supported by this simple, endless practice of being where you are. You are where you are right now, in this bed, in this room, in this night that is moving slowly, unhurriedly, toward its own ending. You have been where you are for some time now, and the monastery has been with you throughout. The painted halls and the library and the garden and the old tree and the pond and the stars and the mountains and the desert wind and the monks rising before dawn and the scholar at his desk and the young novice learning to be still. All of it has been here with you. All of it is still here. The great monastery of Baisiku, whose twin pagodas still stand near the Helen Mountains today, was built in the reign of Emperor Renzong, who ruled Xi Xia in the mid-12th century and was perhaps the most intellectually devoted of all the Tangut rulers. Renzong was himself a scholar. He wrote prefaces to important Tangut translations. He commissioned new translation projects and expanded the imperial printing operation, distributing texts to monasteries throughout the empire. He was not simply a distant patron of Buddhist learning. He was a participant. He studied. He practiced. He sat in meditation and engaged with the philosophical questions the texts raised as live questions about the conduct of his own life. The monasteries of Xi Xia, under rulers like Renzong, were woven into the political life of the empire rather than separate from it. The abbots of the great monasteries were figures of real authority whose advice was sought on matters well beyond the spiritual. The monasteries functioned as archives, universities, hospitals, and centers of artistic production. They were essential to the actual functioning of Tangut civilization. Not peripheral, not decorative, essential. And this is why their destruction was so devastating. Not simply because beautiful things were lost, though beautiful things were lost, but because the monasteries had been carrying living knowledge, medical knowledge, and legal knowledge and philosophical knowledge and artistic knowledge, and the knowledge of how to heal the sick and educate the young and bury the dead with dignity. When those institutions were broken, all of that practical accumulated knowledge was broken with them. The manuscripts could be preserved, but the living tradition that knew how to use them, that understood not just the words, but the practice and the context, the living relationship between the knowledge and the people it served, that required continuous human transmission, teacher to student, generation to generation. And when that chain was broken, what was lost could not be fully recovered, even when the manuscripts were eventually found. This is one of the quiet tragedies at the heart of the Xi Xia story. Not just the loss of the beautiful objects, but the loss of the living knowledge, the loss of the knowing that lived in human hands and voices and bodies, the monks who tended the garden and knew which plants healed which ailments, the sculptors who knew how to mix the particular clay used for the monastery's devotional figures, the musicians who carried in their trained voices the specific intervals of the Tangut liturgical chant, the meditation masters who knew how to recognize the specific signs of a student's genuine progress and how to respond to them appropriately. All of that knowing was in people, and when the people were gone, the knowing went with them. And yet, the garden's old tree survived the frost. Something always survives. Your eyes are closed. The images that have moved through your mind during this hour, the monastery and the mountains and the library and the garden and the novice monk and the scholar at his desk and the twin pagodas standing against the desert sky, those images are beginning to soften at their edges. They are becoming less distinct, more like impressions than pictures, more like feelings than scenes. This is the natural movement of the mind as it approaches sleep. The firm outlines of waking thought give way to something more fluid and more generous in its logic. Let them give way. The Tangut monks understood this transition well. They had studied the nature of the dreaming mind with the same careful attention they brought to everything else. They knew that the boundary between waking and sleeping was not a wall, but a gradual thinning, a loosening that could feel disorienting, or could feel, if you had practiced receiving it, like release. You do not need to practice anything tonight. Your only task is to rest, and you have been resting beautifully. The stars above the Helen Mountains are moving in their ancient slow procession. In an hour or two, the sky in the east will begin to show the first faint graying that precedes the dawn. The monks will rise before that graying, gathering in the hall for the first prayer of the new day. While the stars are still visible overhead, they will chant the same prayers they chanted yesterday and will chant again tomorrow, and have chanted every morning for as long as this monastery has stood. The repetition is not tedium. It is commitment. It is the daily renewal of a relationship with something larger than the individual life. It is showing up again and again in the cold dark before dawn, saying with your whole body that this matters, that the practice matters, that the reaching matters, even when, especially when, you cannot measure its effects or see the distance traveled. You have shown up tonight, in your own way, in your own practice of being present to something larger than the immediate demands of the day. You have shown up. You came to this quiet, to this hour that asks nothing of you except your willingness to be still. And you were willing, and the stillness received you the way the monastery receives the monks who return to it each morning, without judgment, without memory of failures, without requirement of perfection, simply with the open door and the warm lights and the invitation to enter and begin again. The incense that burned in the monastery hall has long since finished. but its trace is still in the air, a ghost of sweetness, a suggestion of the sacred that does not announce itself but simply rests there, available, like the quality of light in a room where candles have recently burned. This is what the Xi Xia monasteries left in the world, even after their physical forms were broken. A trace, a ghost of devotion that persists in the manuscripts, in the surviving pagodas, in the earthen pyramids outside Yinchuan that still rise from the flat desert plain, in the cave paintings in the Helan mountain rock face, in the tens of thousands of careful scholarly pages that modern researchers have devoted to reconstructing what was lost. The trace is real, the ghost is real. What was built with such enormous intention and care does not fully disappear, even when the form that held it is gone. And you carry some of it now. Having traveled here tonight, having let this history move through you in the slow and gentle way that nighttime allows, you are carrying something of it forward. You will wake in the morning, and you will not remember all of this in the way you remember things you deliberately learned. But something will remain, some quality of stillness, some awareness, however faint, of the patience that deep devotion requires, some sense that the world contains more than is visible, that civilizations rise in the dark regions of history and burn for centuries with a light that most people never see, and that the darkness around that light is not emptiness, but space, the same space that the Tangut monks cultivated in their long hours of sitting practice, the space in which understanding, when it finally arrives, has room to be. The mountain outside the monastery is completely dark and completely still. The stars above it are as numerous as they have always been, as numerous as they were on any winter night in the 12th century when a Tangut monk stood in this same courtyard and looked up at them and felt what you are feeling now, the smallness of a single life and the inexplicable comfort of that smallness, the way that being one small living creature under an enormous sky can feel, in the right state of mind, like belonging rather than insignificance. The wind across the desert plain has dropped to almost nothing in these hours before dawn. The monastery breathes, its walls breathe, its library breathes with the patient breath of thousands of manuscript pages holding their words in the dark. Everything breathes. You breathe. The breath connects you to everything that has ever breathed, to the Tangut monks in their cold dawn halls, and the novice learning to sit still, and the scholar at his desk, and the gardener walking his slow rounds, and the old tree reaching upward in the winter garden with his arms full of impossible, unexplained joy. You are enough. You have always been enough. The Xi Xia monasteries did not survive in the ways they survived because the people who built them were perfect, or because their empire was invincible, or because history, in its long and indifferent passage, was ever truly fair. They survived in the ways they survived because enough people cared enough to try, because scholars worked in cold and dimly lit libraries for decades on translations that might take generations to fully matter, because an unknown person sealed manuscripts in a wall with trembling hands and a fading hope, because modern scholars chose to devote their lives to reconstructing a dead language out of love for what that language once carried. The caring was enough. The trying was enough. The reaching was always enough, even when it fell short of what was reached for. Your reaching tonight, in this quiet room, in this dark hour, has been enough. Your willingness to be still has been enough. Your body is completely at rest. Your breathing is the slowest it has been all night. The mattress holds you. The covers are warm. The room is dark and quiet. The night is doing what it has always done, moving slowly toward its own ending, carrying you toward morning without asking anything of you at all. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. The Tangut monks who prayed in these mountain halls 1,000 years ago are resting now, as you are resting. Their devotion has settled into the earth of the Helen Mountains, into the stone of the cave temples, into the dry pages of the surviving manuscripts, into the night air of this valley where something sacred was built, and something sacred, in its own quiet way, remains. You have been here with it tonight. You have received what it had to offer, and now it releases you gently, the way a monastery releases a pilgrim at the end of their visit, with no ceremony and no demand. Only the open gate and the path worn smooth by the footsteps of everyone who came before you. Good night. You have journeyed far through time tonight, across 1,000 years and 10,000 miles, into the painted halls and silent libraries and mountain gardens of a civilization the world nearly forgot. You have walked the path that pilgrims walked. You have stood before the murals that monks stood before. You have felt the cold of the desert night and the warmth of the candlelit hall and the particular quality of peace that accumulates in a space where sincere human beings have been reaching for a very long time towards something greater than themselves. You have carried the Xi Xia Monasteries with you into this night, and they have carried you. Now it is time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes. Breathe. Let the mountains hold the dark. Let the stars turn slowly overhead. Let the ancient, patient stillness that the Tangut people built their lives around come to rest in you completely. And let sleep find you here, in this quiet, in this warmth, in this one beautiful, unrepeatable night of your one beautiful, unrepeatable life.